Hey everybody, it's Nike. I wanted to thank everybody for tuning into this video to watch the updated Warrior Guide. The September feature patch brought a fairly significant nerf to the Warrior in both PvE and PvP. However, the role of the Warrior is still unchanged. Basically, the Banner of Discipline and Banner of Strength are still indispensable party buffs, and as a result of those two utility skills, having at least one warrior in the party will continue to be part of the speed clear meta, at least one warrior. The biggest change for warriors, ironically, has nothing to do with warrior, it's the nerfing of Fiery Greatsword. Fiery Greatsword made Empower allies incredibly good. Since power is a damage multiplier and Fiery Greatsword had provided damage in very large chunks, when your team plan was to use 4 Fiery Greatswords at every encounter, Empower allies became a gigantic DPS boost. Basically, for a pretty standard meta comp party, Empower allies boosted your team's overall DPS by about 12,000, which is the value of having a 6th character in the party. So just that one trait was worth as much as any single character added to the party, which is really good. However, without Fiery Greatsword, Empower allies becomes pretty marginal. The DPS you sacrifice from the DPS build to gain empowered allies is generally a wash at best, and therefore, in light of that nerf, I can't really recommend an EA-centered build for speed clear parties. A minor change for the warrior was Arcing Slice. People are somewhat interested in finding out whether using Arcing Slice is good. When fighting a target below 50%, it does bonus damage. The damage is slightly less than the warrior skill Rush, which is to say it's not super impressive. The one time I would recommend using it is when the boss is close to dying and you need to get one final burst in. If you happen to be on your Greatsword set, just use Arcing Slice and get that last hit in. If you're on your Axe set, just Eviscerate. Eviscerate will be a little bit better damage, but Arcing Slice is perfectly fine to get one last big hit in. But really spamming Arcing Slice on cooldown is not really effective in light of the fact that the damage on it wasn't buffed as much as everyone was expecting. Speaking of finishing a fight with your burst skill, with the change to Adrenaline, being that it immediately degenerates the second you get out of combat and it goes down really fast, you should always use your burst skill at the end of every fight, unless you know for a fact that the next fight is going to occur quickly enough to maintain your Adrenaline. Since it's sort of a use it or lose it thing now, I recommend every time the boss gets to like 10% health, using your Eviscerate or your Arcing Slice, trying to get that hit in before he finishes and just end it really quickly. So based on all these changes, there's really 2 optimal warrior builds to run. The main build is a DPS build focusing on providing the maximum personal DPS while contributing excellent amount of vulnerability stacks. It's a pretty versatile build that works well in organized groups and pugs, and while the theoretical DPS of a pure Greatsword build with a 6-6-0-2-0 trait spread is higher, the utility you get from having fast hands, as well as the additional vulnerability stacking capabilities provided by a fast hands Greatsword Axe Mace build, will give you actually higher overall team DPS. That's why I recommend this build over the pure Greatsword build. This build is also good for both group and solo plays, and when I talk about the traits and the gear, I will go into what I would use for both groups and solos. The second build is a Phalanx Strength build. Phalanx Strength builds sacrifice a significant amount of personal DPS for the ability to stack might for the entire party. A lot of the old Phalanx Strength builds used pure Greatsword DPS rotation, but that had a very weak vulnerability stacking component, and it resulted in worse DPS overall for the team than if you were just using a standard meta build. This build with the fast hands, will sacrifice some of the ability to stack might in order to provide extra vulnerability. However, I will say this about failing strength. It's only really good for pickup groups that have very little coordination, or team compositions that have very little might stacking. If you're in a team that has no Ellies, has no ranger or no engineer who knows how to might stack, and no other warriors who are going to coordinate there for great justices, that's when you would want to use failing strength. The presence of other characters who are able to generate might makes the value of failing strength a lot less and will make you better off running the meta DPS build. So I'm going to get into gear real quick, and we'll go from there. Alright, for gear. For armor, I recommend full Berserker with Scholar Runes for group play, full Berserker trinkets, a Greatsword with Sigil of Night Enforced Berserker, a Berserker Axe with Sigil of Night, and a Berserker Mace with Sigil of Battle. One thing I do want to say is for most warrior builds, there is some amount of Assassin's gear that results in an optimal DPS production. However, what is optimal depends on which food you use and whether or not you have a ranger in your party. Since it's easier to change your foods than it is to change your armor, and since rangers are kind of a dying breed after the Frost Spirit nerf, I do find it best to recommend the helm, chest, and leggings to be Assassin, and the remainder of your gear to be Berserker if you want the absolute most perfect DPS. However, the difference between that Assassin's mix and Berserker is usually less than 1% of a DPS. So if you already have full Berserker everything, I don't recommend you change it. But if you are starting from scratch with your Ascended gear, do consider getting the head, chest, and leggings to be Assassins. But otherwise, full Berserker will suit you perfectly fine. As far as fine infusions go, as you can see, I use precise infusions in all my armor. I find this to be vastly superior. It gives me, if you have fine infusions in everything, as I do, it gives you an extra 3% crit chance and puts me up to base 63. With full buffs, before food, it puts me at 91%, which is quite good. You could use Mighty Infusions. If you already have purchased Mighty Infusions for the +5 power in every slot, the difference is very minimal, and you're probably better off just keeping the Mighty Infusions. I would never recommend overriding the Mighty Infusions, especially given how expensive they are. The gear that I recommend to be a well-equipped warrior, like I said, a Greatsword with a 10% and 5% sigil, an Axe with a 10% sigil, a Mace with Sigil of Battle, a Longbow with a 10% and a 5% sigil, and an Underwater Spear with a 10% and 5% sigil. If you are a true min-maxer, you're going to want a sword with an energy sigil for the situations where you're in a very difficult boss fight and the extra dodge comes in handy, such as Lupicus. A Warhorn, which the sigil on it's irrelevant. I have Battle on mine, but you can. It makes a lot of sense to put energy on your Warhorn. This will help you with trash runs for the most part, so energy would be useful there because some of those trash runs you might need an extra dodge. I also recommend having a backup Greatsword with Sigil of Frailty for the daytime dungeons where the night sigil does not function, and a backup Greatsword with Undead Slaying for dungeons like Ara where Sigil of Night doesn't work either. So that's it for gear. For general. Now, one thing I'm going to mention is for soloing, you're going to want to change over to a set with a Strength Rune. Strength Runes are vastly superior in a solo situation to Scholar. If you only have one Ascended set, you are and you want Scholar on it. If you still want a Strength set, an exotic set of armor with strength in it is not really a huge DPS loss at all. You're not really sacrificing anything since the difference between exotic and ascended armor is pretty minimal DPS-wise. So I would recommend having a set of strength runes for solos. I also recommend strength runes when you're doing fractals because the fights are very long and it's often quite hard to maintain your might stacks. And if you find yourself using the Phalanx Strength build quite often, the Strength runes can come in handy there as well. So these are generally for open world and solos, whereas the Scholar set is for 5-man dungeon runs. So just keep that in mind, and hopefully that helps you gear out your warrior a little bit. So we'll talk about traits in just a second. Alright, so for traits, nothing much has changed here. We're still going to take dual wielding for the extra 5% when on our axe set, slashing power for 10% with the greatsword, and berserker's power for 15% when at full adrenaline. Now, adrenaline is going to be a lot harder to come by when we start a fight, and I'm going to discuss that when we talk about DPS rotations, but we're going to be able to work around it and maintain our berserker's power as best we can. So don't fret, berserker's power is still the best thing you can be doing on a PvE warrior. In arms, we'll take rending strikes and forceful greatsword. And in discipline, we'll take signet mastery. Now, a couple things I want to mention. There's definitely some instances, especially I find in Fractals, where battle standard is very strong. When you want to use battle standard and you feel that it's necessary, you don't really need signet mastery. You can change it to warrior sprint to get the additional movement speed. Additionally, when you're in a solo situation, you want to probably change out rending strikes for deep strikes. This will give you extra crit chance, and as you can see, I'm at 100% crit chance, or well, it goes down to 99, but nonetheless, you can see it's very high. With food, I'd be at 100. So yeah, for solos, deep strike is the way to go over rending strike. For group content, rending strikes. So that's it for traits for the main warrior build. They haven't changed too much because the nerfs mostly affected other areas of the warrior than the traits themselves. So next I will discuss the Phalanx Strength. Alright, Phalanx Strength is 05063. In arms we take rending strikes to maintain our team vuln contribution, and forceful greatsword. In tactics, we're going to take empowered, 1% damage boost for every boon on you. Empowered allies, which will help boost our team DPS. And of course, Phalanx Strength, the namesake of the build, which will help us stack might on the remainder of our party. And in discipline, we'll take Signet Mastery so that we can use Signet of Rage more often. If you're in a situation where you are taking Battle Standard, and most likely when you are running this build, you're the only warrior in the party, you want to take both banners and Battle Standard, you'll want to change this to Warrior Sprint, and then change Empowered to Inspiring Banners. This will give you much shorter banner cooldowns and 100% banner uptime, and allow your Battle Standard to be used more often. I find that's very effective. It's worth giving up 3 or 4% of your personal damage in those situations to have those things covered. So really, this was the same Phalanx Strength build I recommended before. Nothing much has changed here. I do advise people to use this rather than one with 6 in arms and no fast hands. I think this is superior, especially for your overall group benefit. So that's basically it for traits. Next I'm going to talk about consumables. Alright guys, so for consumables, I recommend you have the full complement of dungeon potions for everything you do. I carry with me Harpy Feathers for the times that I need to gain stealth for short distances. It helps a lot. I keep Fire Elemental Powders when I need to summon a Fire Ember, and same thing for Pet Whistles when I need to summon an Ogre Pet. Scale Venom helps me keep weakness uptime in Fractals where you have to fight lots of trash mobs. And I keep Sharpening Stones for situations where there's no dungeon potion that's useful and where Scale Venom isn't really helpful. For food, I find the best 2 foods for general DPS builds is the plate of truffle steak and bowls of curry butternut squash soup. For either the Phalanx Strength or the DPS build, these are the best 2 foods. If you're on a budget, you can use bowl of butternut squash soup, which is very close, or slice of candy dragon rolls. If you're on an ultra budget or just roaming an open world, I recommend plates of steak and asparagus. They're decent DPS and they are only a few copper each, so they're quite good. That's basically it for consumables. I don't really go as in-depth with everything like med packs and high-like poison pots that some other speedrunners do, but these are a pretty good minimum to keep, with, especially if you have the Slayer pots for every dungeon and you have really good food. You are being an asset to your party. So that's it for consumables. I'm going to end the video with a quick DPS rotation to kind of give you an idea of how the build will play in PvE in a boss fight, and that'll be it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to hit me up in the comments, and I appreciate it, and thank you again for tuning in. Have a great night.